Another question here?
I'm just kind of thinking about the cost of point of care tests. I remember reading a little bit about some kind of new areas of diagnostics taken up by George Whiteside. Basically a piece of paper that you would drop a sample on and it would be able to tell that. Do you see kind of more advances in this kind of like ultra low tech, very reproducible kind of ability to diagnose at point of care rather than some of the kind of the machines and stuff that you were showing that looked, I'm sure, have been made as cheaply as possible, but perhaps not could be made even more cheaply?
I'll let Jackson answer this too, but technology marches on. If you think about your computer 5 years ago, I've got a thumb drive in my pocket that's got more memory than my computer did, and it costs a tenth of the price. And that's clearly happening with the biomarker world, all the point of care testing. And with all the advances in your computer, they're happening there, and it's all connected wirelessly. It goes to the patient's chart immediately, rings on my phone, I get the lab result back. All this really cool stuff is happening. So it's moving rapidly along. I don't know the answer is the low-tech drop a thing on a piece of paper. I think that's like laying hands, the era of that. We're now testing for proteins, and Jackson can speak to this, but we're testing for proteins at the picogram levels. So it is so beyond that kind of technology. And when I started, we did that with cerebral spinal fluid. If it came out of the nose, we put a piece of paper on there, and if it had multiple rings, it was spinal fluid. If it didn't, it was snot. And there's a big difference in the two. So we would make all sorts of diagnoses on that. Nowadays, that's really recognized as just not being good enough.
Yeah. So we've evaluated 200 platforms, all the latest technology, and even one that came out of Dr. Whiteside's lab at Harvard. And the issue is how low do you need to go in terms of sensitivity? So those really simple sort of paper tests for what we need to do, which is picogram level per ml sensitivity, we need more technology than that. That said, technology is evolving rapidly in the point of care area. There are some very exciting technologies out there that will drive this to be smaller, faster, cheaper, to the point where we'll be able to put our test at some point, I predict, onto a handheld device that a SEAL team will have anywhere in the world, and they'll identify the guy who just got hit close to an IED, whether or not an asset needs to come in and take him out or not. And I think that will happen. So, it's just like your cell phone was this big, things are going to shrink and get faster and cheaper and better.
Picograms 10 to the minus 12. I mean, it's, we're working in an era now that, when I started my training, which was like 20 years ago, we were dealing with 10 to the minus 6. So we have moved 2 orders of magnitude beyond. It's remarkable, and it's the reason that we have been able to improve our diagnostic accuracy so much better than it ever was before.
And I think another simple answer to that question generally is, technologies in the diagnostics area are going in multiple directions, right? So you saw the big machine that I put up here earlier. I mean, that's high-tech, cutting edge stuff for highly automated, sophisticated laboratory setting. But at the same time, we have companies, member companies and others pursuing the kinds of technologies you're talking about, which can be used in really, again, as I referenced before, low resource settings, right? Where you don't need access initially to clean water, paper-based technology, you don't need electricity, stuff like that. And the issue there is partly cost. So, maybe you get down to a handheld device that a SEAL team can carry. Well, the effort and the research that goes into that might require you to, charge a certain amount for that device, whereas in the low resource settings to, produce a test that maybe can be deployed widely across Africa for remote outposts, they need those tests to cost in a matter of pennies, per test, as opposed to what, maybe Dr. Streeter would have to charge for, a SEAL team type device. So the short answer is, the technologies are being developed to address all these different areas. And the bottom line is that the progress being made in all these, in all these fronts is really fascinating. I encourage you to, spend more time learning about it too.
The one spot that we've had success in the area that you're directed at is if you think about the single-use tests. Now we're all up here talking about machines and multiple use and the cutting-edge stuff, but pregnancy tests are a perfect example. You pee on a stick and you're done. Same thing with drug of abuse tests. We have that exact same technology. We have that exact same technology for heart attack. Now it's not the best test we have. Is it good enough? And those are always decisions that have to be made. But we have a blood test, you squirt it on a stick, and 15 minutes later you go, there's 2 lines, that's a problem. That's a heart attack. So that may be some opportunity. It's not as simple as a piece of paper, And they're not necessarily cheap, but they are, single-use disposable tests will have a niche for sure, certain. That kind of thing for the HIV world would allow home HIV screening. That'd be pretty cool.
Question over here.
I had a question about the treatment guidelines. As you move the diagnosis up and you maybe challenge some of the currently agreed upon best practices, do you have to maybe come up with new solutions for those, and do you have to maybe develop them in tandem?
Yeah, this is a great question for adoption. So as in our case, is we developed our protocol for the ALERT trial. We did that in conjunction with some leading experts in the field, like Andy Jagoda at Mount Sinai in New York, who writes the ACP guidelines for TBI care, or is part of that committee. So if tests are developed and they're not part of treatment guidelines, they're probably not going to get used as much as if they are. So for us as a company, we think about that very early so that we can build that into the kind of evidence that we're developing that will get published and hopefully lead to a level 1A recommendation for guidelines.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. As tests get better, we have to change the guidelines. The trouble is guidelines are always like 5 or 8 years behind, so that they usually catch up, but by then we've moved further. There's always that lag.
I have a question for Dr. Streeter. So you talked about the fact that you've identified other markers as well in the TBI area that could be used to support additional tests. But can you comment more generally on whether the R&D that you've done, both in terms of the science of TBI, but also the platforms that you're building, will be potentially support new emerging diagnostics in other areas?
Yeah, so as we think about platforms and right partners, and particularly DoD platforms that could support, we think a lot about infectious disease and bio threats. So one platform that could run other types of tests would make sense, right? So that they could bring a small platform in theater that you could not only do TBI testing, but you could test for anthrax and other, infectious disease agents, maybe even in water or things like that. So as we evaluate technologies that have not only solutions for what we're doing today, but could be scalable to other things, is something we definitely consider.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for our speakers? Well, Congresswoman Capps was not able to join us due to the current series of votes, but we appreciate her desire to be here with us. Thank you all very much for attending. We hope you found it interesting and valuable, and please feel free to follow up with us if you have any other questions. Thank you very much.